Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the program. You're watching our mid-morning edition of Arirang News on this Friday, May 22nd, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Shin Se-min. Before we dive right in, these are the stories we're following at this hour. A worrisome development between the U.S. and China. The world's two biggest economies, embroiled in a long-drawn trade war, are now back in a tussle over the coronavirus pandemic. A second wave of COVID-19 could hit Europe, warns the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. The Italian Prime Minister says it is no time for nightlife. Plus, South Korea's former presidential aide says Seoul will still push to get things done, even if there's no progress between North Korea and the U.S. The war of words between Washington and Beijing over the COVID-19 pandemic continues to rumble on. China's turn to fire back this time. Beijing's foreign ministry says it's slamming a top official in the Trump administration after he labeled China, quote, brutal authoritarian regime. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
Washington and Beijing are continuing to trade verbal barbs after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called China a brutal authoritarian regime on Wednesday in response to China's decision to target Australia with barley tariffs after a call for an independent probe into the origins of COVID-19. At a news conference Thursday, China's foreign ministry slammed Pompeo's remarks.
Once again, Mr. Pompeo made irresponsible remarks, and he has played to perfection the part of an extremely irresponsible politician. But his numerous lies have bankrupted his credibility in the world.
In response to the U.S. pointing the finger at China's initial handling of the COVID-19 outbreak as the reason for the global pandemic, the spokesperson said the outbreak in the U.S. is solely on them, not China.
With regard to COVID-19, as the Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Pompeo should tell the world why the U.S. government didn't take strong prevention and control measures between January and March, why it was for such a long time against people wearing masks, and why it failed to stem the fast spread of COVID-19 in the U.S. He has a responsibility to explain to the world.
Trade tensions are also escalating between the two biggest economies as the U.S. Senate on Wednesday passed legislation that could ban many Chinese companies from listing on U.S. stock exchanges. The bill would require companies to certify they are not owned or controlled by a foreign government. While the law could be applied to any foreign company, watchers say the move to strengthen disclosure requirements is aimed squarely at Beijing. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
China is proposing a controversial new security law in Hong Kong that could ban sedition, secession, and subversion, a move likely to fuel anger in that city. Beijing proposed the legislation during its delayed annual meeting of parliament, a move that critics say will effectively end the territory's autonomy. Demonstrators in Hong Kong have repeatedly protested against what they see as an erosion of the territory's independence by the Chinese Communist Party. And shortly after Beijing signaled a tighter grip on Hong Kong, U.S. lawmakers immediately proposed a bill that would essentially sanction any Chinese officials that enforce such a law. President Trump says the U.S. would react strongly if China followed through with its plans. China's biggest annual political event of the year, called the Two Sessions, kicked off on Thursday after a 2-month-long delay due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The gathering opened with a minute's silence for the people who have lost their lives from COVID-19. Thousands of delegates bowed their heads in silence after singing the national anthem at Beijing's Great Hall of the People. While the event is usually held for around 10 days, this year's event has been shortened and some sessions are to be held over video link. It's not a question of if, but of when and how big regarding a second wave of COVID-19 sweeping across Europe. And that's the chilling verdict from one of the top health officials on that continent. Our Kim Jae-hee has more on the current situation in Europe and the rest of the world.
The director of the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, Indra Aman, says that although the timing and size is unknown, a second wave of COVID-19 is expected to hit Europe at some point. She explained 85% to 90% of Europe's population is still vulnerable to the virus, which is circulating much more than it did in January and February. She warned that it's not the time to completely relax and stressed Europe should ready itself for a second wave. Italy, one of the hardest-hit countries in Europe with more than 228,000 cases and some 32,000 deaths, is also expressing concerns over a possible second wave. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte thanked citizens on Thursday for following quarantine measures and said the worst had passed. That said, he still urged citizens to respect social distancing rules and to wear face masks, stressing that now is not the time for parties or enjoying nightlife and big gatherings. He warned that if infection rates rise again, the country will go back on lockdown. Elsewhere in Europe, COVID-19 cases in the UK have now topped 250,000, and death toll has surpassed 36,000. The UK government said around 17% of people in London and around 5% or more of the rest of the UK have tested positive for coronavirus antibodies, meaning they've already had the illness. Further afield, Iran reported nearly 2,400 new cases on Thursday, its highest daily rate in nearly 50 days. This raised the country's total infections to nearly 130,000. Russia, despite its relatively low death rate, has the second most confirmed cases in the world, with a total of around 317,000 cases and more than 3,000 deaths. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
IOC Chief Thomas Bach says the Tokyo Games will have to be scrapped altogether if the event cannot be held next year. Speaking to BBC Sports on Thursday, Bach said you can't forever employ thousands of people in an organizing committee and also leave the athletes in uncertainty. Bach said all possible scenarios are under consideration, and he called it a mammoth task and said staging such a massive sporting event behind closed doors is, quote, not what we want. Back in March, the IOC and Japanese officials made the unprecedented decision to postpone the Olympics to next year as coronavirus gripped the entire world. South Korea has extended its special travel advisory by another month in a bid to prevent South Koreans spreading COVID-19 in the country upon their return from overseas. The Foreign Ministry says the advisory will remain in place until June the 19th. It also added that the decision is based on the continued global spread of the virus, and the government said it also stressed that many countries are still applying strict border controls on foreign entrants. The special advisory is imposed in the case of an urgent and short-term danger to travelers. In Seoul, first it issued the advisory back in March 23rd. Despite the drop in South Korea's overall exports due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the country's newly developed industries have seen their exports soar. According to data from the Korea International Trade Association, exports from 8 newly developed industries, including next-generation semiconductors, biohealth products, and electric vehicles, totaled $21 billion in the month of January to March period, up 17% from the year before. The Trade Promotion Agency stressed the need to nurture new promising export lines in preparation for the new post-coronavirus era. It also predicted a growth in global demand for healthcare products and digital equipment for online meetings and lectures. South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics has revealed plans to build a new foundry production line in the South Korean city of Pyeongtaek to meet growing global demand for cutting-edge extreme ultraviolet solutions. The company says this will expand its presence in the contract chip-making sector, currently dominated by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, otherwise known as TSMC. The new foundry manufacturing line will be established at its chip plant in Pyeongtaek, some 70 kilometers south of Seoul, making it Samsung's 7th foundry production line. Now, this is in line with the company's plan to become the world's top logic chip maker by the year 2030 through an investment worth some $108 billion. President Moon Jae-in's former top aide is calling for the two Koreas to meet again soon for another summit after ties crumbled over the past year or so. He also said that if there is no progress between the North and the U.S., President Moon will still push ahead to get things done. Our Kim Hyo-sun with more.
The leaders of the two Koreas need to meet again soon. That's according to President Moon Jae-in's former chief of staff Im Jong-seok, who stressed that a summit will help break the current impasse in inter-Korean relations. In an interview with the quarterly magazine Changbi, Im, who served as President Moon's first top aide until January 2019, called for inter-Korean summits to be held on a regular basis. He said this needs to be done just as you would do when you visit your neighbors.
친구 간의 평범한 일상처럼 이루어진 이번 회담에 매우 큰 의미를 부여하고 싶습니다. 남북은 이렇게 만나야 한다는 것이 제 생각입니다.
Referring to the stalled talks between Pyongyang and Washington, Moon's former top aide also said that if no progress is made, President Moon will try to push ahead to get things done. He highlighted that President Moon will be communicating with the U.S. sufficiently despite some negative views. While praising President Trump for his resolve and drive, Im revealed that Stephen Biegun, Washington's point man on North Korea, quote, put pressure on Seoul just before the landmark summit in 2018. He also stressed that overcoming the issue of international sanctions is crucial to make progress on proposed inter-Korean projects. Explaining they can receive global consent, including from the U.S., Im stressed the need for Seoul to leverage its relations with China and Russia as well. As for Pyongyang, he called for the regime to seriously consider resuming dialogue, as the two Koreas cannot wait for Washington to act, as there's not much time until the U.S. presidential election in early November. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The Seoul city government has resumed its campustown program, which provides funding for university students' startup projects. Temporarily halted due to the COVID-19 outbreak, the program is scheduled to have 190 startup companies on campuses at universities by the second quarter and 500 by the end of the year. Seoul plans to provide budding entrepreneurs with free workspace as well as funding. And to prevent infections, the program will run based on strict quarantine measures with commonly used areas undergoing regular disinfection.
Good morning. Regions along the East Coast will have breezy highs again, hovering in the mid to upper teens for most parts, while those of us in the western parts of the country will notice highs going a couple notches higher than yesterday, reaching in the mid-20s. So let's take a closer look. Seoul and Gwangju should get up to 25 degrees Celsius. Gyeongju will climb to 21 degrees this afternoon. And it will be mostly to partly sunny during the day, but upper regions will see dark rain clouds moving in by the evening. So have an umbrella ready for your evening commute. That said, the rain will only be light 5 to 10 millimeters, and it should let up before the sun rises on Saturday. Sunshine and warm readings are in the forecast for Saturday here in Seoul, but Sunday looks to be a rainy one for the central region and Jeollabuk-do province, and do expect Sunday's rain to fall from dawn into afternoon. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that does it for this edition of Arirang News. As always, thank you for watching.